Once upon a time, when the harmattan winds carried the scent of dry earth and the evening fires burned low in the compound, there lived a young woman named Adaeze. She was born in the village of Umuna, the only daughter of a schoolteacher named Chukwuemeka and his quiet, gentle wife, Ngozi. From her earliest years, Adaeze was bright as a new coin. She read every book she could find, sat at the top of her class year after year, and earned a scholarship to study at the university in the city. The whole village clapped and danced when they heard the news. "Our daughter has done it," the elders said, nodding their white heads with pride. "This is what learning looks like." Adaeze returned from the university 4 years later, tall and polished, her English smooth as river water, her wardrobe full of clothes the village women had never seen before. She spoke of feminism and modernity, of progress and enlightenment. She loved her village in her heart, but somewhere in those 4 years, she had also learned to look down on it. She was not entirely wrong to want change, but she had forgotten something important: that the people who loved her most had never left. It was at a conference in the city that she met Emeka. He was an engineer, handsome and ambitious, from a respectable family in a neighbouring state. Their courtship was swift and sweet. Emeka's family came with palm wine and kola nut, with yam tubers and the proper words spoken in the proper order. Adaeze's father wept quietly behind his wrapper, grateful his daughter had found a good man. A wedding date was set, and that should have been where the joy began. The wedding day arrived dressed in bright sunshine. The village square had been swept clean. The women wore their finest wrappers, and the drummers warmed their hands early. The elders, 7 of them, the oldest men of Umuna, sat in their honoured chairs beneath the great umbrella, their faces oiled and their walking sticks planted proudly in the earth. It was their custom to bless every union before the ceremony could proceed. Their words were not merely tradition. They were, as the village believed, the breath of the ancestors speaking through living mouths. But Adaeze had not prepared herself to receive their blessing with patience. She stood before them in her white lace gown, beautiful as a water lily, her bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. The oldest elder, Mazi Obiora, leaned forward on his carved staff and began to speak in the old tongue, his voice low and ceremonial. He spoke of the roots of marriage, of how a woman leaves one compound and enters another, of the duties of wife and mother and daughter-in-law. He quoted the proverbs, as was custom. When a tree is well rooted, even the storm respects it. May your home be rooted in patience and in truth. It was then that Adaeze raised her hand. Not gently, not politely. She raised it the way someone stops a taxi. "With respect, sir," she said, loud enough for all the guests to hear. "We are in the 21st century. These old proverbs about women leaving compounds and entering others, they are outdated. I am an educated woman. I am not property being transferred. Let us please move on." A silence fell over the square like a stone dropped into still water. The women stopped fanning themselves. The drummers let their sticks rest. The 7 elders looked at one another, their old eyes carrying a weight that Adaeze, in her brightness, could not yet read. Mazi Obiora did not raise his voice. He simply closed his mouth, folded his hands over his staff, and said, "Nothing more." The other elders followed. They rose one by one and walked away from the ceremony quietly, the way old men do when they have been gravely hurt but choose dignity over anger. The wedding continued without their blessing. The guests laughed nervously and told each other it was nothing, that young people today are like this, that education sometimes makes the head too full. But the older women, the ones who had buried husbands and raised sons and wept at too many graves, exchanged glances that said more than words. Adaeze's own mother, Ngozi, sat through the reception with a smile painted over a deep unease, praying quietly that she was wrong about what she feared. Adaeze and Emeka moved to the city. The first year was beautiful. Emeka was gentle and hard-working, and Adaeze threw herself into building their home with the same fierce energy she had poured into her studies. But trouble is patient. It does not always arrive with noise. By the second year, small cracks appeared. Emeka's family, who had witnessed the wedding and heard what Adaeze said to the elders, began to treat her with a coldness she could not understand. His mother was polite but distant. His aunt smiled without warmth. When Adaeze tried to speak to Emeka about it, he would sigh and say, "You know how families are. Give them time." But time passed and the coldness only deepened into frost. Then the difficulties truly began. A business venture Emeka invested in collapsed and took their savings with it. Adaeze lost her job when the company she worked for restructured. They tried for children and found that the road was longer and harder than they had imagined, each month bringing hope that crumbled into quiet grief. The apartment that had felt like a palace in the first year began to feel like a cage. Arguments came often now, small ones that grew large in the echo of their struggles. Emeka grew withdrawn. Adaeze grew sharp. They loved each other, but love alone cannot sweep a compound clean. One evening, after a particularly bitter argument, Adaeze sat alone on the balcony, watching the city lights blink in the darkness below. She was 31 years old and she felt ancient. She thought of her mother's face on her wedding day, that smile over unease, and she wondered for the first time what her mother had been praying about. She thought of the 7 elders rising from their chairs. She thought of Mazi Obiora's voice, low and ceremonial, and how she had stopped it with a raised hand, and something moved in her chest, slow and uncomfortable, like a stone being turned over to reveal what lives beneath. She called her mother that night. Ngozi listened in silence for a long time, and when Adaeze was done speaking, her mother said only this: "My daughter, go and see the elders. Not because they were right about everything, but because you were wrong in how you treated them. There is a difference." It took Adaeze 3 more months to find the courage. She travelled back to Umuna on a Saturday, carrying kola nut and palm wine and a wrapper of good cloth as gifts. Her father, Chukwuemeka, walked beside her to the compound of Mazi Obiora. He did not say much. He simply held her hand as though she were 8 years old again and he was walking her to school for the first time. The old man received them under the same great tree where the wedding had been held. He looked older than Adaeze remembered, smaller somehow, but his eyes were still sharp and quiet as still water. He did not make her wait. He did not make her beg. When she knelt before him and began to speak, her carefully rehearsed words dissolving almost immediately into something raw and unplanned. He simply watched her with those eyes and let her finish. "I was proud," she said. "I was educated and I confused education with wisdom. I thought because I knew many things, I understood all things. I did not mean to humiliate you, but I know now that meaning does not undo what was done. I am sorry, Mazi. I am truly sorry." The old man was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and placed his hand on her head, the same gesture her own grandfather had once used. And he spoke. "A young bird that leaves the nest too fast forgets that the nest knows things the sky does not. We do not hold your words against you, my daughter. Youth is not a crime. But now that you know better, do better. That is all any of us can do." He called the other elders. They came one by one as the afternoon lengthened, 7 old men gathering again beneath that tree. And this time, they gave Adaeze the blessing that had never been properly spoken over her marriage. They poured libation and spoke the old words into the air, and Adaeze wept without embarrassment, her father weeping quietly beside her. She returned to the city changed. Not softened, not made less of herself, but deepened in some way she found difficult to describe. Things did not become easy overnight, easy as a lie. That stories sometimes tell, but the coldness in Emeka's family began slowly to thaw. A new job came. A pregnancy followed, fragile and precious and carefully carried. In time, their home found its footing again, the way a tree does after a storm. Not the same as before, but rooted more deeply for having survived the wind. Back in Umuna, the elders told the story often, not to shame Adaeze, but to teach. They told it to young men and young women who came home from universities and cities with sharp edges and the certainty of the newly educated. They told it gently, the way a good elder teaches as an offering rather than a punishment. And Adaeze herself told it too, in time, to her children and to anyone who would listen. She never stopped believing in education, in progress, in the right of a woman to speak and be heard. But she had learned that a sharp blade and a wise hand are two different things, and that wisdom, unlike a degree, cannot be collected in 4 years and carried home in a briefcase. Question for you. Have you ever confused confidence with wisdom, or spoken in a way that was right in content but wrong in manner, and paid the price for it later? Moral lesson. Wisdom does not wear modern clothes. It does not belong only to the young or only to the old, only to the city or only to the village, only to the learned or only to the unlettered. True wisdom knows how to honour what came before it, even while reaching for what comes next. Education opens a door. But humility is what allows you to walk through it without breaking it off its hinges. Respect costs nothing to give, but everything to reclaim once it is lost. Thank you for watching. Please share this story with someone who needs it.